Hello and welcome to Westmusings, 10-minute museum talks, here at the Western Museums Association in Arizona 2016, brought to you by ATAU, Fine Art Services, along with post-production being provided by Soulstream Media. I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to take a moment to introduce one of the more amazing women I've had the opportunity to be introduced to, who's here, working at the Herd in Arizona, who is, for her part, let's see, I think we say that people of a certain age don't do much, and I haven't read many of my introductions, but in this case, not only is Jaclyn Roessel doing education and public programs as the director there for the Herd Museum in Phoenix of those programs, she's also founder of Grown Up Navajo, a blog and multimedia performance. And also her career is about creating spaces for Native Americans, and she'll tell you more about the programs that she has created, primarily on the theme of Confluence. She is also a writer and a poet, and as far as I can see, maintains a strong following throughout the state, recently named one of the 100 most important people in Arizona in the 21st century. With that, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to the Education and Public Programs Director of the Herd Museum, Jaclyn Roessel.
Twa e ina. Twa e ina. Water is life. This is an idea and practice that I was raised in, growing up on the Navajo reservation in the northeastern part of Arizona. Coming from a family who participated and practiced in traditional belief systems and ceremonies, we prayed to water. We understood water as not just a resource, but as having a spirit and as having power. Mother water was important to us and was a foundational belief system and part of our healing and practice. We made offerings to her, and she was a part of our healing, a part of our growth, and a part of our protection. This idea of acknowledging water as being something important, as being filled with life and sacredness, is a common thread amongst many indigenous peoples around the world. This concept of understanding the sacredness of this life source doesn't just end at the liquid treasure and its physicality, but also the places in which this liquid beauty has conversations with the land formations, the embankments that it touches, and that's where our story begins. Confluence is a geographical term that relates to and describes the place at which two rivers meet. And in indigenous thought processes and worldviews, these places of confluences are something that hold special distinctions. These are places where we pray, these are places where we make pilgrimages to, and these are places that in some cases we hold ceremonies at. All understanding and holding together this idea that water is life, water is sacred. So we can learn a lot from confluences. We can learn a lot from water. And much of these lessons are embedded in the understanding and challenge us to trust, to surrender. Earlier this year, I was fortunate enough to have the experience of curating an exhibition called Confluence, Intergenerational Collaborations. And this exhibit really occurred at the cross-section of curatorial process and educational programming. And it also engaged two very sacred bodies and entities, one being our mentor artists between the ages of 30 and 40, and our mentee artists between the ages of 16 and 20. And the artists were asked to come together and respond to not just Confluence, but a theme and growing trend that was occurring within indigenous communities in Indian country across our nation. And that is one of the very high populations of young people. Within my community on the Navajo Reservation, over half of our population is under the age of 30. Within the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community right next door to us right now in Scottsdale, over half their population is under the age of 18. The time and the need and the reason for bringing together and holding dialogues between generations has never been greater. And this exhibit allowed for there to be a creative response, for Confluence to be the language in which these two generations communicated with each other, thinking about how not just the future of their museums and how they'd work together, but how they would continue to grow and develop as leaders within their communities. So over the course of 3 months, these two bodies of water began to learn each other and work together to create in either large-scale project format or a small scale of work projects that responded to this idea of confluence. And they worked together, creating, in some cases, vibrant murals. In one case, a PSA that discussed issues of cultural appropriation. And in another, a video game that dealt with alien sheep from outer space. All of these requiring of the mentees a bit of fearlessness because they were working in mediums they hadn't worked before. And this idea, this ability to surrender to a journey where you don't know the destination, where nothing's familiar, is something that I took away from this. The ability of seeing our mentees really transform and begin to trust the creative process with which they were working. Not just because of a familiarity with their mentor, but because each of these artists within these teams understood and respected the sacred perspectives with which they both held. And in addition, it also challenged the museum to be more flexible, to exist in that creative journey of surrendering. And in that process, our exhibit and design teams let go and allowed for the artists to give feedback of how they wanted their work displayed. And the exhibit and design teams were the ones to support these ideas and help facilitate the vision that the artists wanted to work in. It also allowed us to ask one of the mentor artists to create the logo for the exhibition. And from another team, we learned the process of wheat pasting to create our title exhibition installation, which had the added benefit of being very cost effective for those of us who know how expensive label text can be. And so what culminated on opening night was an exhibit that brought together and engaged a very high number of our American Indian community members from all different backgrounds, from all different ages, in a way that an exhibition hadn't up to that point in terms of engaging youth. And this was exciting, and it was felt by both the artists and the museum staff. It was as if we all could understand and feel this energy shift. And while some of that came from the fact that things that seemed familiar, like a hoop dancer making shapes out of their sacred hoops, but to the dancing and the base of Rihanna's work, some of that also, most importantly, came from the understanding that the space, the sacred space that was created because of the two generations of artists that came together and held these conversations and processed this idea of confluence, that that's where the power lied, and that's what we were responding to. So how do we continue in this new day to engage in conversations of confluence? In what ways can we learn from water and continue to change the flow and the direction of the work that we're doing? For us, Confluence was really a watershed piece, was the spring at the start of the river. And from that, we began and were able to identify more tributaries to be able to work in, including being able to engage with one of the artists from Confluence who was beginning to explore how creativity could be a piece of building greater resiliency within indigenous communities. We began to decide that we were going to work with and partner with the Resilience Indigenous Arts Experience as a way for us to not just solely hold programs on our own museum grounds, but to reach out and engage with an artist-led, community-based project. And this was exciting for us. It changed the flow and the direction of our programs in being able to exist in both our space and the communities. And for us, it also allowed us to grow in a new way, especially because this particular festival occurred in New Mexico, out of our normal region that we offer programs. So how do we protect the confluence? How do we keep ourselves from building dams in the way that we process and think about partnerships that are fluid within our community? How do we continue to engage in these dialogues? For a lot of us, the answer is to trust and surrender to the fact that just because we are able to merge with another entity doesn't mean that our sacredness is lost in those partnerships. But what we can learn and look toward as our guide is the fact that when rivers come together, they become more powerful. When the water reaches the ocean, they create a movement of waves, a sea of change. And in that, the water is our guiding point. It's our focal point. And we can work from this abundant mindset, understanding and knowing that these types of generous, reciprocal relationships create greater harvests, allow us to build watersheds in which the lands are lusher. And we can look toward this lesson of understanding and challenging ourselves to see the power in the phrase, when I water you, you water me, we grow together. Ekehe.